So, good afternoon, and first of all, thank you for inviting me in this session, and which is very interesting. So, I've been asked to present the results of the TEEB for water and wetlands, and for this I will spend a few words on the TEEB process in general and on the TEEB water and wetlands in particular. I will explain what wetlands are and why they are so important for our welfare and also well-being and our survival. And then I will argue that we really need to measure and to take into account the value of wetlands in our policy decision makers. And then I will focus on the role of wetlands in poverty alleviation, which is the main topic of this session this afternoon. And then I will conclude with some quick policy recommendation. So what is the TEEB? The TEEB was already mentioned here before. And the TEEB, the Economic of Ecosystems and Biodiversity Initiative, is a wide initiative which puts together more than 500 authors and a lot of different experts of different disciplines. And the main idea behind the TEEB initiative is that one of the main causes for environmental degradation lies in the fact that environmental services and ecosystem services that don't have a value on the market, and for this reason they are invisible to the eyes of the policymakers and the other people who have the power to make decisions. So the idea of all the TEEB initiative is that if we are able to attach a value to ecosystem services, then it will be easier to argue for their conservation. There are a lot of different reports which have been published under the umbrella of TEEB, including a set of books targeted to different kinds of stakeholders, including policymakers and local administrators and business sector. And also there are some kind of sectorial studies and on studies focused on country level. So today I'm discussing the results of the TEEB Water and Wetland, which was published at the beginning of this year and which you can download from the TEEB webpage. The TEEB Water and Wetlands was promoted by the Ramsar Convention. For those of you who don't know, the Ramsar Convention is a convention which was signed by, today there are I think 47 countries signing the agreement. It is called the Ramsar Convention because it was signed in the Ramsar city in Iran. And the objective of the Ramsar Convention is to protect wetlands and to protect the water system around the world. So this report was led by the IEP, and the core team includes the Ramsar Convention itself, Wetlands International, the CBD, IUCN, UFZ. But also the report benefited from the contribution of a wide range of experts on different issues and also of people implementing different case studies. So the whole idea of the report is to summarize the main issues around the wise management of wetlands and also to collect tens of case studies which might help to make the case for the environmental protection of wetlands. So, what are wetlands? Maybe this is not always obvious. The Ramsar Convention intentionally adopts a very broad definition for wetlands in order to make sure that a wide range of ecosystems fall under the protection of the convention. So, under the Ramsar Convention definition, wetlands are areas where the water table is near or at the surface level, or the land is covered by shallow water, for example, marshland, peatlands, lakes, rivers, etc. But also there are areas of marine water at a depth of not more than 6 meters, and this is a convention because it is thought that this is the maximum depth at which ducks can feed and dive together. It is just a convention, but also there is a list of islands or body of marine water deeper than 6 meters which are included under the convention, and typically the coral reefs because of their very high ecological value. Also, the definition includes human-made wetlands, for example, farm ponds, inundated agricultural land, etc. So with such a broad definition, inland wetlands cover at least 9.5 million square kilometers, which is 6.5% of the Earth. And if you also include coastal wetlands, then they cover at least 12.8 million square kilometers. So we are discussing about very important ecosystems categories for the life on the planet. Wetlands are very crucial for our well-being and also for our survival, because without wetlands we wouldn't have the water cycle as we know it today. But it's not only this one. It is also the carbon cycle and the nutrient cycle, which strongly depend on wetlands. Well, there are thousands of examples on this, but for example, peatlands act as a very important carbon storage. And different wetlands have an important role in the nutrient cycles and act as, for example, denitrification, play a denitrification role in different environments. Also, wetlands provide a wide range of ecosystem services, and not only provisioning ecosystem services, which are water and also food, also forestry products, but also they provide a wide range of different ecosystem services. For example, the regulation of water quality and of water quantity, the reduction of risk from flood or drought or extreme events, and also the nutrient cycling, the carbon cycling, and also cultural ecosystem services, as many wetlands has a very important role in, for example, cultural identity, and also play a very important role, for example, for the recreation and tourist sector. So we are speaking about ecosystems which really play a crucial role in the life as we know it. Here you can see the results of a literature review on the different monetary evaluations of different kinds of ecosystems. And the number into brackets are the number of studies which were reviewed for each kind of ecosystem services. And you can see the bars shows the ranges of monetary values which were attributed to different ecosystems in a logarithmic scale. And the star is the average value. So I showed you this graph in order to show that in many cases wetlands are the kinds of ecosystems which obtain a most important, the highest monetary valuation. For example, coral reefs are very important not only for cultural and tourism sector, but also because they act as a nursery for fishery, for example.
Is that per square kilometre?
Yeah, sorry, per hectare.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, yes, I didn't tell you. So these are just like number, and this is a literature review, but it's just a way to make clear how important wetlands are. However, now I'm going to give you some very sad figures. Wetlands is being lost at a very worrying pace, and some estimates shows that at least 50% of wetlands have been lost, and at least 60% of European wetlands have been lost. Approximately 20% of the worldwide mangroves, which are hotspots for biodiversity, as you might know, have been lost between 1980 and 2005. Also, coral reefs are being lost at a very worrying pace, and at least 20% of them have been lost. So we have now like a clear picture on kinds of ecosystems which are very important for our well-being, but nonetheless they are being degraded at a very worrying pace. So what's the consequence? Since we have seen that wetlands provide us with very important ecosystem services, the loss of wetlands imply a loss not only in the natural value, but also in human well-being. And also, since ecosystem services also are at the basis of all human activities and economic activities, then the loss of ecosystem services also have a negative impact on the economic dimension and on the economic prosperity of many different stakeholders. So the point the TEEB for water and wetlands report make is that it is very important and very urgent to try to reverse this trend, because wetlands provide natural infrastructure that can provide humans with a whole range of ecosystem services. So, and then this brings us to the next point. So how can we help to reduce and to stop the degradation of these ecosystems, which are so important for our survival, for our well-being? One of the main issues is that the value and the importance of wetlands should be taken into account into policy-making decisions. So one of the cases which is very famous and which is often mentioned when making this point is a study from Barbier et al. In 2007, when they compared the private and public benefits of shrimp productions versus mangroves protection in southern Thailand. Probably most of you already know this study. So the author demonstrated that if we compare just the private profit of these two activities, then the private profits associated with shrimp farms are much higher than the ones associated with mangrove protection, which comes from basically timber collection and non-timber products. And why is it so? So one of the reasons is that because in southern Thailand, shrimp farms are subsidized. So this means that public money is used to support a private profit in this case. So this is one of the reasons. If we consider the private profits without the subsidies, then we see that the difference between the profits of these two categories of private actors is the difference is much less. But also, shrimp farms are a very destructive activity, and after 5 years, it is abandoned because the area is not suitable anymore for the activity because of pollution and degradation of the ecosystem. So if the government wanted to restore the ecosystem, then it needed to pay for it. So if we take into account also the cost of restoration, then we will see that the pictures change completely, because restoring the ecosystem has a very high cost. But it's not only this, it's also that if we take into account also the ecosystem services which are provided to the society as a whole, then we will see that the final choice between these two policy directions might change a lot, because mangrove play a very important role also as a fishery nursery and also as a storm protection place. So when mangroves allow us to reduce the impact of storm, and if we take into account these benefits to society at all and attach a monetary value to it, then we will see that the trade-off between these two activities may change completely. So sometimes the TEEB approach is misunderstood, because sometimes it is thought that TEEB always advocates for monetary valuation, but this is not the case. The idea is that under the TEEB initiative is that monetary valuation can be one of the instruments can be used to argue for environmental protection, like in this case, but also it's not the silver bullet for it. So you can, I mean, it is important to be aware that there are a lot of different evaluation methodology, monetary and non-monetary, which can be used according to the objective of the analysis and the available means, etc. So the TEEB initiative explains that it is important to demonstrate the importance and the value of wetlands using a wide range of methodology, including qualitative assessment, quantitative assessment, spatial analysis, and also monetary evaluation when appropriate, like in this case. So also it is important to be aware that there are a lot of different instruments which are available to protect and to make the case for environmental protection in wetlands, which include a wise site management, and which is able to take into account all the ecosystem services provided by wetlands. And also there are regulation and land use planning instruments which can be used. For example, the establishment of protected areas, or zoning, or the integrated water resource management, integrated coastal zone management, marine special planning, which are all regulation instruments which allow to take into account the different ecosystem services and to make the most of them. But also it is important that property rights are clearly defined, which doesn't necessarily mean that common goods should be privatized, but it means that it should be clear who has the right to use and to manage the ecosystem in order not to incur in the famous tragedy of the commons. And also, when appropriate, and only in certain circumstances and under certain conditions, market-based instruments can be used, including, for example, taxes, fees, or charges, which can influence the decisions of policymakers or private agents, or including the phasing out of environmentally harmful subsidies, like the one in Thailand I talked to you about before. Also, market-based instruments include tradable permit schemes, and like there are examples, for example, of salinity credits in Australia, liability rules to make sure that in case of a disaster, then the polluter pays for restoration and compensation, payment for ecosystem services, which are programs which allow to remunerate the providers of ecosystem services in order to make sure that ecosystem services are maintained or are improved. We'll see an example if I have time in a minute. And also voluntary schemes, including, for example, offsetting. So the point is that in each occasion, one or a combination of these instruments could be used with the objective of make clear the benefits that humans obtain from ecosystems and the way of making the most of them. So the topic of this session today is how ecosystems contribute to poverty alleviation. So I will spend a few words on that. As it was said before, natural conservation is important for everybody, but it is maybe even more important for pure communities, because pure communities tend to depend more on ecosystem services for their livelihood, and also for insurance against risk, for example, risk of economic crisis or of an increase of the price of basic commodities. And also because in general, poor have less access to alternatives. So, for example, in industrialized country, if the water is polluted, then the society can afford to pay for a water depuration system, but in poor countries it's not always the same. And also because in general, poor people have few alternative livelihood options in the case that the ecosystems from which they depend is deteriorated. And here are some other like sad figures. It is estimated that about 600 million of the rural poor live on lands prone to degradation and water stress, or in areas which are vulnerable to climatic and ecological disruptions. And also, it is estimated that 1 billion people in developing countries rely on fish as primary source of protein. This means that maybe poor people are more vulnerable to the degradation of ecosystem services than other, like in rich countries, people in rich countries. And this makes the case for the protection of wetlands as a way to alleviate poverty and to reduce poverty. Also, as I said before, water and wetlands play a crucial role in food security, because water is needed for agricultural production and for cattle feeding, etc. And also because wetlands play a key role in the fishing, as a nursery for fishing. Also, water is important for energy production, not only in the hydroelectricity industry, but also, for example, it is required for cooling in thermoelectrical plant. So this is to say that improving and restoring wetlands is a way to improve not only water security, which is the availability and also quality of water available to the poor, but also of food and also of energy security. So investing in wetland management and in wetland protection is, in many cases, it's also a cost-effective way to reach this development objective. And also, it is important to observe that wetlands, in many cases, improve resilience against climate change effects, like, for example, floods or storms, etc. So for all these reasons, it is very important that we make the most of the wetlands we have and we invest in wetland protection and enhancement. For example, how? Now, this is a good question. Well, for example, water sanitation can be improved through wetland restoration. Wetland act as a natural water sanitation installation, for example. Also, if we have healthy wetlands, then we can provide with clean, fresh water the local communities. And also, restore or improved wetlands can provide a livelihood option for local communities, for example, in terms of revenues from the tourist sector. So now, how much time do I have? 5 minutes. Okay, I will give a couple of examples. So you will find a lot of examples on all these issues I've talked about before in the TEEB Water and Wetland Report. But I can explain a couple of examples just to be a bit more concrete. So one of the most important or most well-known payment for ecosystem service program is the one which is carried out in Mexico with the objective of preserving hydrological services provided by forest areas in terms of aquifer recharge and also of improved water quality and quantity, and in the terms of reducing the impact of flooding. So in order to preserve these areas, these services, in Mexico it was established to pay forest owners according to different kind of forest cover they own. So the different payments were established. The money came in part from government funding and in part from a water fee, which was managed separately from the other water financing. So this scheme was considered very successful as it allowed the deforestation rate to decrease and also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because of the avoided deforestation. So this is an example on how reducing deforestation also helped address poverty in the area, because most of the forest owners which got the payment are the ones who live in poor areas. So this is an example on how PES scheme, Payment for Ecosystem Services scheme, can help reduce both environmental degradation and also poverty. You can find more details on this and also a long list of references in the TEEB Water and Wetland Report. Another example is refers to the, I'm not sure to pronounce it correctly, but it should be something like Nakivubo wetlands in Uganda. So in this area, there were plans to drain a swamp of more than 40 square kilometers for agriculture. But then it was found that the ecosystem services provided by the swamp were very valuable to the local communities and to nearby cities, and especially as regards water purification and treatment. So there was, as regards the interaction between science and policy, there was this Emerton and others who made a study and who demonstrated that maintaining this wetland would cost approximately $235,000 per year. And if the wetlands were drained, then it would have been a sewage treatment facility would need to be built, which would have cost more than $2 million. So in this case, Then after these studies, it was decided to abandon the draining plants, and then the area was designated as protected area. So this is a success story which shows how recognizing and demonstrating the role of a wetland in the general welfare, and also giving a monetary value to the ecosystem services it provides is critical for decision making towards restoration of wetlands. We have 2 minutes, okay. I just want a last example, and you can find plenty of examples if you want to download the report. So a third example is the one of the Tubataha reefs in Philippines, which is a very important, it's a hotspot for biodiversity. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which contains a great amount of biodiversity and important species. And in this area, it was recognized that the coral reef were being degraded at the worrying space. So it was decided to build a protected area in the zone. However, local fishers didn't agree with the protected area because they wanted to be allowed to fish in this area. So the solution which was found is to make a monetary evaluation of the cultural service related to the coral reef. So a willingness to pay study demonstrated that the divers, which were very keen on maintaining this area, were willing to pay a small fee to ensure protection of the coral reefs. So as a consequence, a policy solution was found of a no-take areas around the coral reefs, plus a user fee for divers, which was used to compensate the fishermen not to fish in this area. So it's a very interesting case because this project allowed to, on the one side, to protect the coral reefs, which then improved substantially in the following years, but also the coral reefs act as a fishery nursery. So in the following years, the fish catch from fishermen in a nearby area increased a lot. So this is another example which can show that healthy ecosystem improve livelihood options of local communities. So at the end, it was accepted by local communities. So I will skip the last example. I don't have time. And just to conclude, the whole argument of the TEEB water and wetlands shows how it is so important to transform our approach to water and to wetlands, and to demonstrate and show the value of the ecosystem services which are provided by water and wetlands, as I said, not only in monetary terms, but also using qualitative and quantitative indicators. And the point is that this is very much needed in order to make these benefits we obtain from ecosystem visible not only to the eyes of environmentally sensitive people, but also to the eye of general policymakers and the public in general. And also, we need to make clear around and outside here that protecting and restoring wetlands are important to not only to improve water security, but also to improve energy security and food security. So, and it also can play an important role in poverty alleviation. And if we try to disseminate this kind of approach, we will find that in many cases, win-win solutions can be achieved, like the ones I explained to you before. So in many cases, wetland restoration doesn't only provide environmental benefits, but are also important for improving the well-being of the humans. That's it.